And we are live, or we should be live. Hello there to Jane Eisner.
Hello, Mel.
What a pleasure. From Ramat Gan in Israel all the way to Manhattan in New York.
Yes, the
What
miracle of technology.
the miracle of technology. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to talk about miracles today. And the miracle we're going to talk about is Jane Eisner and Carole King. And I'm going to introduce myself because I always forget. So I'm Mel Rosenberg, and I am usually the host of the Children's Literature Channel, the New Books Network. But today I have a special permission from the powers that be to interview Jane Eisner because I am intrigued by your book on Carole King. And just for full disclosure, I've written a manuscript, a picture book manuscript on Carole King myself. Not
Oh,
published yet, not published yet. So I was delighted that there is an interest in this wonderful, wonderful lady. So Jane, welcome to the program. And
well, thank you for having me.
it's a great honor. A few words about the book. You have a book to wave around that just was published in September, I think. Um,
Uh, yes, I do. Hold on.
I should have asked. How foolish.
Yeah, so here it is. Uh, has a few little markers in it so that I can remember certain passages.
Okay.
Yes, it was published in September as part of the Jewish Lives series published by Yale University Press.
Okay, wonderful. And just 2 minutes of who Carole King is for you.
Well, I've been a fan of her music since Tapestry was released in 1971. I was a teenager then. The music just spoke to me, as it did to, I think, millions of others since. Um, and as a person, I connected with her. Uh, I was from the Bronx. She was from Brooklyn. She had, curly hair like I do. There was an authenticity about her that was very attractive, I think. And I'd followed her career ever since. There were a lot of really good albums that were released after Tapestry. I went to some concerts. I saw the play on Broadway. And when I had the opportunity to write this book, I really wanted to delve into her life. There hasn't been a biography of her published at all.
Except her own biography of herself.
Yes, she did release a memoir, which, like all memoirs, is really interesting and has a lot of omissions in it. It's how she wanted to be portrayed. It's very courageous in certain parts and kind of mystifying in others. So I wanted to decode that. I'm a journalist. I like to just do my research, interview a lot of people, listen to the music, figure out what I thought about this complicated woman.
Mhm. I think that complicated is a bit of an understatement,
Yes,
especially after reading your book. But you also now you've omitted, you see, because you have also a kind of a semi-family connection.
I
Friends of
do.
friends, almost gesprochen.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't go that close, but that is a little complicated too. There's a small community surrounding a lake in Connecticut. Carol's father, Sid Klein, remember that she was born Carol Joan Klein. She changed her name. So Sid Klein was the head of the Jewish Firefighters Association in New York City. There were many, many Jewish firefighters at the time. And late 1940s, early 1950s, there was a real desire by these firefighters to find a place for their wives and children to go to during the summer. And so he was the instigator of creating this community that has moved from being a summer community to Jewish firefighters to an all year community to anyone who wants to buy a house there. And for a time, my aunt and uncle rented a house and then bought a house, which is still in the family. And for a couple of summers when I was in high school, I spent several weeks there and became somewhat close with Carole King's stepsisters. Her parents had divorced, married each other again, divorced again, each of them remarried, and they both were really attached to this community. So they both had homes there with their new spouses. And so I, knew her mother, and then her father had two children with his second wife. And one of those children was a really good friend of my sister's. So that was my connection to her. And as a result, we were invited to the really iconic concert that Carole King did in Central Park in 1973. And after that, the connection kind of waned some, as these things do as you grow older. But it did help me understand a key part of her upbringing. And when I mentioned before about how memoirs sometimes have omissions, this part of her upbringing around what's known as Lake Wabeeka was not even mentioned in her own story, which was one of the things that mystified me and encouraged. Then I felt like, okay, I got to find out about this. So I tracked down the woman who was her best friend at the time there and was able to interview her. And so her connection to that community really interested me. And I argue in the book that it was very important.
Okay, in what sense, in brief?
Well, the one time that she had mentioned it was in an interview some years ago, and she sort of joked about it because she eventually moved after living in New York City and then Los Angeles. She moved to Idaho, which remains her main residence. And
A great place for Jews to live.
yes. And and she mentioned that she loved the outdoors and the wilderness ever since her father started this community. Um, but that's sort of it. Uh, I do think there's a connection there. The first few years of this community was quite rustic. They lived in these sort of two-bedroom cottages. The first year they didn't have running toilets. And I think that sort of spurred her on to have a lasting, lifelong connection to the environment. And in fact, now she's an environmental advocate. There's also another thing, Mel, that I think the community there introduced her to, which is a kind of Jewish life that isn't what we uh, nowadays think of as religious or observant, but was very Jewish. I mean, this was a Jewish environment.
Well,
And
this is why I'm bringing it up because
Mhm,
if there's anything that would surprise me about Carole King, it's her what we call Yiddishkeit.
mhm.
Because I know you're writing part of a series about Jewish lives, and you talk a lot about Jewish writers and singers and producers and musicians, and that's wonderful. But Carole King doesn't, Carole Klein, if you will, doesn't come across as a very as a creative, highly influenced by Judaism. And I'm sure you want to correct me now.
No, I think you're right. I don't want to elevate her connection to Judaism or the Jewish community. Uh, m- uh, my sense of it is, and what I found interesting was both the atmosphere, the environment at Lake Wabeeka, and perhaps even more formative in her childhood and adolescence in a part of Brooklyn. Sheepshead Bay, Gravesend, it's known as now. That part of Brooklyn was really Jewish. It was filled with working class Jews like her parents, children and grandchildren of immigrants who, were living in these modest homes, and were able to take advantage of terrific public education. Certainly, many of them belonged to synagogues, but they were not what we would think of as Jews who have kind of the two pillars of Jewish life today, which is, connection to and remembrance of the Holocaust and connection to Israel. And some of that was
Or or
understandable.
or, or some religious bit.
Exactly. There were some observant Jews in that community. There are a lot more now. But they felt very Jewish. They had seders. They, just had this kind of secular Jewish, and I don't know what the right word is. I
Mm-hmm.
actually think the best way to describe it is like the Chilunim in Israel. They,
This was crossing my mind, and I, to an extent, am one of those Hilonim, if you want to call them secular Israelis.
Mhm,
This show is, of course, about you and your wonderful book, but I think it's completely different, and it did cross my mind when I was talking to you and reading
mhm,
this. And we'll save this for our coffee in Manhattan. But if the book that I've written, that I told you about, a children's
mhm.
book, is
Yes.
about a girl who goes from door to door, and there's nothing Jewish about the story, except everything about the story is Jewish. And when you read the story, you'll see it's a story
Mhm,
written by a Jewish guy about the Jewish experience. I don't find in Carole King this secular Judaism, and this for me is a mystery because she
mhm,
did grow up in Jewish, she was in this environment, she was in the Jewish community in Brooklyn, and she went to camp and so on. And I don't see that anything rubbed off on her writing, the same way that you haven't written the book about Paul Simon yet. But when you do, we can have a
There
similar.
is a very good book that recently came out about him. So,
Mhm. Yeah,
um, well, I want to disagree with you slightly.
good.
I think there were times in her adulthood that where she was connected to some form of Judaism.
Oh,
The
for sure, for sure. But Jade, in her songs,
well, that depends on how you hear them, Mel.
okay,
I have come to hear some of those songs in a way that you can interpret them as somehow singing to the divine. Um, I would argue that. I don't mean that's the only interpretation. You think of a song like one of her most famous, "You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman." Clearly, that's a woman who is singing about a man and the way she feels. But it has, first of all, it was written for Aretha Franklin, and so it has a real church kind of cadence, a real gospel cadence. It's kind of remarkable that Carole King and her first husband, Jerry Goffin, two Jewish kids from New York City, could write this song for a gospel singer from the South, but they did. And but again, it's sort of how you listen to it. There's
yeah,
another
yeah,
song, "You Light Up My Life." I think
yeah.
you can really listen to that not just as a love song to a man, but really something that emanates from somewhere else. And she also said that one of her, again, most iconic songs, "You've Got a Friend," she has written that sort of came to her from someplace else. It just came through her.
Yeah.
So, again, what's so amazing about her music is that you can interpret it in different ways. It means different things to different people. So I'm not sure that's a Jewish impulse so much as a spiritual one.
Mhm.
Um,
So
And I,
this is intriguing because
Mhm.
you wrote in your book about so many Jewish musicians. We're not going to have time, Jane, to talk about everything. That makes me very upset. I'm not a journalist. Journalists know how to focus. I don't know how to focus. But if we talk about Irving Berlin, right,
Mhm.
who wanted so badly to be an American, but
Mhm.
the everything about his writing and his music is Jewish. When
White Christmas? I don't know. Is that Jewish?
no, no, but a lot of his other songs are.
I
We're
know.
not going to talk about the Irving Berlin now, but we can another time. Is there a book about him in the series? I
Yes,
don't
there is.
remember.
It's
Ah,
very, very good. Very good.
that's too bad because he's quite a character. So this is what I'm going to now say something, and you can criticize me, of course, and I hope you will, because my job here is not to be right; it's to be interesting. Is to say that Irving Berlin, he tried, in a sense, to hide the fact that he was Jewish. He wanted to be American. He wanted to be 150% American, right?
Mhm.
God bless America, and I'm dreaming of White Christmas, yada yada. Some of his songs and melodies are very, very Jewish, as with the Gershwins. Um, and um, and I'm thinking that a few generations later, people like Carole King and Paul Simon, part of their Jewishness is their resistance to appearing as a Jewish musician. I'm going to now stop because you're not going to agree with me, and I want to talk about other things.
Well, I don't know if it was resistance so much as a natural progression. Remember, as you hinted at, Gershwin and Berlin, and they changed their names too. They were living and writing and creating at a different time for Jews. By the time Carole King came of age, there was much more assimilation. There was much more acceptance of Jews in especially cultural life. Similarly, as a woman, she was able slowly to break into that and really made remarkable strides as a woman. But I think that their Judaism didn't, I think they sensed that their Judaism didn't stop them. Now, at the same time, she changed her name from Klein to King.
And then she
Did she?
added an E to Carol.
She did. Well, that was because there were so many Carol Kleins in her school.
It's all right.
Um, yeah,
Now,
but
Jane, I don't want to. I'm crazy about Carole King. I would love to meet her. I'm a huge groupie. I spent a year writing a manuscript about her. I want, for the record, I'm crazy about her. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I'm just saying that, she never said that she changed her name from Klein to King because she wanted to hide her Jewishness. Was that a part of it? I don't know, probably. But I do think it's important to mention that the kind of Jew she was meant that there were times in her life when she absolutely dipped into Jewish ritual. For example, she insisted that she has four children, her youngest is a boy. She insisted that Levi have a bar mitzvah. She has, to this day, a relationship with a rabbi in California who officiated at her mother's funeral at one of her daughter's weddings. And so I think for her, it was this kind of ballast in her life, something that she called upon at different times, but not something that necessarily identified her life.
Something that you have in times of need, but perhaps you won't need to
Yes,
have.
in times of need or in times of joy. Um,
Mhm.
but both her first two husbands were Jewish. She was married in Jewish ceremonies,
That's right.
and but that didn't
It's,
stick.
it's something interesting. And now let's talk about Jane. You've spent most of your adult career as a very Jewish journalist, and you presided over the Forward. I want to call it the Forward, because that's how I knew it when I was a kid growing up in
Mhm.
Canada. This very prestigious and quite ancient Jewish newspaper. And so, after such an illustrious career, you've interviewed presidents and prime ministers, and I get to interview you today. Um, what brought you to write this book, and how did Yale come to you? I should mention Yale University Press, so prestigious in this wonderful series. How did you get this book deal?
Well, I was approached by one of the editors of the series, who asked me to propose a subject of a biography. And again, I had been interested in Carole King all my life. There was not at that a full-fledged biography of her alone. There was a book written about 20 years ago called Girls Like Us,
Mhm.
which was a kind of group biography of Carole King, Joni Mitchell, and Carly Simon. A terrific book. I highly recommend it. But nothing about her specifically. And in particular, nothing that really dissected her music, which was one of my goals in this book. So I still had to write a book proposal the way authors do, but there's no doubt that I had an opportunity that kind of eased the way into my writing this book. And I'm very proud to be part of this series, Mel. I mean, I think
And,
it's,
and you should be.
yeah,
The book, first of all, the book is wonderful, and it touches on so many different aspects, and I'm jealous in a very good way. Um, and I have lots of questions to ask you. So let's go back to the questions. Um, you called the book Carole King, She Made the Earth Move. Okay, that is a very interesting name for a book. Because in the context of the song, and you talk about this in your book, it's a sexual reference.
Well, it is. I mean, it's the opening song on Tapestry. It's just got an absolutely recognizable melody. I mean, I bet most people would know exactly what the song is.
Move
Yes.
under my feet, you
I
feel the
mean,
sky come running down. You make my heart start to tremble and beat whenever you're around. Whoa, but okay,
I didn't know you can sing so well.
I didn't either.
The opening chords are just recognizable. I think, I think it's one of the songs that everyone they can hear it and they know that it's her. It was somewhat innovative and a little controversial because it does talk not, fairly explicitly about women's sexuality. But that's not the only reason. I also feel that to me the one of the key word is earth. So when she was in Laurel Canyon in Los Angeles at the second stage of her career, when she truly became a singer-songwriter that sang her own songs, and that was different than what had happened in New York. She also was kind of an earth mother there. You look at the cover of the album Tapestry. She's sitting in her home by the window, actually uh, knitting a tapestry, sitting under curtains that she sewed herself. Her hair free. I mean, it was a very domestic scene, and I think that has always been a part of her. And then I also thought it was a gesture to, as I mentioned before, her environmental activism. The fact that she really has pushed for certain legislation that would protect, especially the Rocky Mountains. So that's why I chose that title.
That's excellent. I must say that you were yeah, you're much younger than me. You have a birthday coming up soon, so Mazal Tov.
Thank
Um, we're not going to get into that. But I was 21. I'm 74 now. So like when Tapestry came out, I was 20. And
you.
you know, Jane, I remember listening to it for the first time. I mean, how many
Mhm.
records do you remember listening to?
Yes,
And especially so far away.
yes.
So far away, doesn't anybody stay? And I said, "Well, who the is that amazing? What is that? What, she wrote those songs? Co-wrote those
Yes,
songs? What is
yes.
going on here? Who is that?" And a lot has been said about Tapestry. It's one of the best albums that ever was.
Hmm.
And you write in your book, which I find incredible, music theory, and you talk about her own style of writing music
Hmm.
and how deceptively simple it appeared.
Hmm.
But it started out simple. Like one of my favorite songs from 1960, "Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow,"
Hmm. Yes.
which I think is a real iconic song in her life because she was 17 or 18 when she wrote it,
Hmm.
and everybody thinks, including me, that she wrote the words and Jerry maybe wrote the music, and it's the
Hmm.
opposite. The music is very simple. That is very, very,
Hmm.
50s music.
Hmm.
Um, and then
Well, except that,
yeah,
let me just interrupt you for a minute. I agree with you, except that the melody in that song was something new because 1950s music was kind of boppy and didn't have much melody. And what she did in that song, and you're right, she wrote the music. She did not write the lyrics. Her then husband, Jerry Goffin, did.
which is also crazy because how could Jerry write this song about a girl afraid of committing herself? Um, these are incredible people.
They really were. And I think the two of them had a kind of mystical collaboration that created these songs. I agree with you. It's kind of stunning that, you know, he got into the head, into the heart of a woman who has a romantic encounter and then wonders whether it's going to continue past that evening. And you know, I think it was one of their um, really amazing talents. They were able to create music that was had its in origins about situations or feelings that they did not necessarily have but could imagine. Will You Love Me Tomorrow is one example. Natural Woman is another example because it has such a gospel feel. And I think it is true that a lot of people do hear those songs and think she wrote the lyrics as well. But in fact, that era of songwriting was very atomized. One person wrote the music, one person wrote the lyrics, one person was the producer. One person performed it, another person sold it. That's the way music was created in what is known as the Brill Building era, which is actually a real building near Times Square. And there was another
It,
building.
it's yeah. There's a few buildings that house these fantastic creatives.
Exactly. And a lot of them were Jewish, a
Yeah.
real lot. Cynthia Weil and Barry Mann, Burt Bacharach and Hal David.
They're friends and competitors.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Especially Cynthia and Barry were very,
Hmm.
very close friends, still are,
Hmm.
but they were competitive too, because there was a lot of pressure for these pairs to write music that would feed this growing market of teenagers and young adults who wanted to hear these songs on the radio.
In one sentence, what I mean, I think it comes across clearly that Carol has always been fiercely competitive.
Mhm.
Um, in one sentence, where do you think this comes
I think she had both innate talent and innate ambition. And again, I think this goes back to her childhood. Her mother was very influential, really pushed her. I don't mean it wasn't in a mean way, but she really kind of encouraged her daughter a lot, protected her in certain ways. When she was part of a musical group in high school and it looked like they were going to get a small contract, she, helped it happened that it was just about Carole, not the three other members in this group. And the other members knew it because Carole had so much talent, both in writing
She had that
and
star
composing.
talent. And
Yes.
so what was her role of her dad did beyond Daddy Drive Me to Manhattan? What was his
Well, and in fact, he didn't do that. She took the subway.
okay.
Um, yeah, it's he's a little bit more of a fuzzy figure in her life because, especially, she was a teenager, young teenager when her parents first divorced, and she lived with her mother. Her father lived nearby. He would definitely be in her life. And I think there was still a lot of love there. But the main parent was her mother.
But yeah,
And
but still in families like this, it's a lot about like for me also, we grow up with this need to show people that we can succeed.
yes,
Um,
well, especially because remember, this was a neighborhood where so many of the people like her were children or grandchildren of immigrants. So they were newcomers to America, and America was opening up to them. There was after World War II, there was a lot of anti-Semitism here. By the mid 50s, that had decreased markedly. Lots of reasons for that. So they weren't necessarily stopped by in their career by being Jewish. Things were starting slowly to open up for women, so that too enabled her to really kind of push open the door of the record industry, which she did quite forcefully, starting in high school. I mentioned the subway. You can't discount that.
mhm.
Um, Suddenly there was access. I rode that subway from Sheepshead Bay to Midtown Manhattan. It's a long ride, but you could do it. And it was cheap, still is relatively. Uh, and and that meant it that someone like her, whose father was not gonna drive her around, could still do this on her own. And I think that was really important, and not just her. I mean, you've mentioned some of the other people who were her peers. Barbara Streisand from Erasmus High School. Carole King went to Madison High School. They were rivals. There was Paul Simon in Queens. There was Neil Diamond. I mean, to me, and these
and
are
and 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 Neil Sedaka,
exactly, and these were all actual peers. They were the same age.
the
And
same age, Jewish kids, and
exactly,
incredible.
with amazing, amazing talent, but also
Mhm.
real deep desire to make it.
It was like, oh, you're not going to take me. It's okay. I know where the subway is. I'm going to
Yeah.
show you. This is when I think about it, and this is my take. I might be wrong. So what is, in your opinion, the reason? I mean, two things here, Jane, and this comes across very clearly in your book. The transition from simple chord progressions and bass lines and lovely melodies to
Hmm.
more complicated music. Was this because of the development of the music of the Beatles? To what do you attribute this? And then I'm going to ask the next question. We know the story of James Taylor and kind of pushing her to the microphone to
Hmm.
sing at the college performance. Um, was was there something else leading up to that? I mean, because her peers were producing albums.
Well, to your first question, I think it was just a natural evolution of her talent and more of a confidence in her own ability, not just to compose, but to write. So you mentioned So Far Away. That was a song she wrote, music and lyrics. It grew out of her life. She was touring. By then, she was married to her second husband, Charlie Larkey. She had children at home. She knew she needed to tour for her career. She wanted to tour, but she was torn. And, that's one of the songs that has spoken to me. I don't know if I said that right. That still speaks to me decades and decades after I first heard it. And I think try to answer your question, that was just one example of the evolution and the confidence that she had that she could indeed write these songs. And it's true that there were other albums at the time, but Tapestry was different. You mentioned the Beatles. Uh, there's a classic thing that Jerry Goff and Carole King wanted to be like Paul McCartney and John Lennon, and McCartney and Lennon were known to say they
And
wanted to
yeah,
be
and
like Goffin and King.
you mentioned this in the book, and
Yes,
it's so it rings true. I mean, the Beatles. The incredible thing about Carole King is that together with Jerry, they had huge hits in the '60s that people don't associate with them, like
Mhm.
Chains that the Beatles covered, right? It's
Yes.
crazy.
Yes. But the Beatles broke up at the very end of the 1960s. And that, I think, was one of the reasons why the singer-songwriter movement, which grew up in Laurel Canyon in Los Angeles, I think that's one of the reasons why it blossomed. I'm an oldest child. I have a younger sister. When I went off to college, I know that that created more room for my sister to develop and to do her thing, not in relation to me. And I mean, that's a little bit of an analogy, but I think it's like that. So the Beatles are now separated, obviously.
So they
Um,
sucked up everybody's oxygen until 1969,
Yeah,
1970.
to some degree they did. And then there's this opportunity to create a different kind of music, folk music, more political music. Her music is not so political, but you think of things like what Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young wrote, and other examples of that. And I do think it enabled them to think about writing and singing, performing, both live and on records in new ways. And what I find just remarkable was in January of 1971, in adjoining studios, Carole King was recording Tapestry, Joni Mitchell was recording Blue, James Taylor was recording Mudslide Slim. They played and sang on each other's albums.
And
There
Carol
was,
snuck into Joni's studio to play the piano once.
yes, yes, because
By
that,
the way, this is all in your book, and I love you for that. If so, we're coming towards the end of this wonderful interview. What can you do? I told you we'll have to have another one. This was just too much fun. We can.
yes.
I think you have to write a book now. Okay. What would be if you were going to now write another book? Okay, following this beautiful book about Carole King, and we're going to mention again that it's published just about 2 months ago with Yale
Hmm.
University Press, and it's called Carole King. She made the Earth move,
Hmm.
um, and I really highly recommend it. I enjoyed it on so many levels. What is going to be your next book?
Well, that's something I think about, morning and night. I don't know really. It's a challenge to write about someone who's still alive, and is so media phobic that I was not able to interview her. So, I actually think that made for a better book because I could be more analytical, but still, that was a challenge. I love the historical research in this. I loved my own challenge of learning to play her songs, some of her songs on the piano so that I could better describe their originality. Um, I'm not really sure, Mel. I mean, if you have suggestions,
Well, what
I
we're
would
going to do,
recommend them.
Jane, we're going to send everybody away to run out and buy your lovely book, and we're going to reconvene in about 2 minutes and share some ideas. It was a real honor. For me, it's a little bit outside my comfort zone, even though, I do love music and I'm a musician
Mhm.
sometimes, but usually I interview children's book authors. So this was a rare a rare privilege for me. And I'm Mel Rosenberg, and I've been with the wonderful, wonderful Jane Eisner, who's celebrating this wonderful new book and a birthday coming up soon and Hanukkah next week. And it's been a real joy to have you on the New Books Network. And we're going to say goodbye to everybody, and we're going to run out and come back and just have the tete-a-tete and talk about your next book. So bye-bye, everybody else. Happy
Bye.
Hanukkah, happy Merry Christmas, Merry everything, Happy New Year, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye.